The story of Pope Joan is one of the medieval world's most fascinating mysteries. It tells of a woman who allegedly disguised herself as a man, climbed the ranks of the church, and briefly reigned as pope, until a dramatic gender reveal ended her life. The tale of the first and only female pope first surfaced in the chronicles of the 13th century and spread widely across Europe, and even gained official church recognition for a time. History says every pope was a man. Now let's explore if the truth says otherwise. The earliest known account appears in a Latin chronicle by Jean de Mailly, a Dominican friar writing around 1250. His Chronicle of Metz contains the first mention of an unnamed woman pope, though he sets her story in the year 1099 and doesn't give her a name. According to his brief report, a talented woman concealed her gender and became a curial secretary, then a cardinal, and finally, pope. The deception was revealed when she went into labor and gave birth during a public procession. In this telling, the consequences were dire. She was tied to a horse's tail and dragged through the streets of Rome, before being stoned and then buried. Jean de Mailly even added that a fast was instituted in memory of this event and her punishment. This initial version is brutal and cautionary, reading like a morality tale of the results of deception unveiled, rather than an actual historical account. Later in the 13th century, another Dominican chronicler, Martin of Troppau, included an expanded version of the female pope story in a popular compendium of papal and imperial histories. Martin's Chronicon Pontificum et Imperatorum became one of the most widely read chronicles of the later Middle Ages, and its account of the female pope was especially influential. In Martin's version, new details appeared that set the template for the legend. The woman pope was given an identity, John Anglicus of Mainz, implying an Englishwoman born in Mainz, Germany. Martin placed her in the 9th century after the pontificate of Pope Leo IV, who died in 855. He wrote that after Leo, an Englishwoman who hailed from Germany, who went by John Anglicus, occupied the papal throne for over 2 years. Martin's narrative fleshes out her backstory. She was an exceedingly intelligent young woman who wanted to pursue further education. The only problem was, educational opportunities for her were extremely limited, so her and her lover cooked up a plan. They would go to Athens to further her education, but they would present themselves as two men seeking further knowledge in this ancient center of learning. While in Athens, she quickly proved to be far superior to her peers intellectually, and was brought to Rome where she taught science and theology. Her intellectual capacity and moral character were so universally respected that she was eventually chosen as pope. However, things ended up going off the rails in a very big way. She became pregnant, and the inevitable happened during a papal procession between St. Peter's and the Lateran Basilica. Caught in a grand religious procession, the disguised pope went into labor and delivered a child in the street, in full view of the astonished populace. Martin's chronicle says she perished during childbirth, not as a result of an angry crowd, and notes that after that, future popes avoided passing that particular spot in processions. This female pope, according to this telling, was then rapidly buried where she perished, and the baby became a ward of the church. Interestingly, according to this account, her son later became the Bishop of Ostia, in Italy, and saw to her receiving a proper burial. It's with Martin's account that the name Joan or Joanna entered the legend. Martin's authority on historical matters was taken very seriously by contemporaries. He was a papal chaplain, and his chronicle was read widely as factual history. Further, the sensational nature of the anecdote meant that the tale of Pope Joan spread rapidly, as the idea of a pregnant pope is a story that's built to rapidly spread. Once inserted into popular chronicles and literature, the story of Pope Joan spread throughout Europe, capturing the medieval imagination. During the 14th and 15th centuries, the legend was often accepted as historical fact. Many people didn't doubt that a woman had once been pope. It was retold by preachers, included in encyclopedic works, and referenced by scholars of the time. For example, the Italian author Giovanni Boccaccio in 1363 wrote about the female pontiff, giving her a place among notable women of history, albeit as a cautionary tale of pride. A woodcut illustration from a 1474 printed edition of Boccaccio's work even depicts Pope Joan in the very moment of giving birth, baby in arms, wearing the papal tiara. This vivid image shows how concretely the story was imagined in late medieval culture. Some historians also speculate that the High Priestess card for 15th century tarot decks is a reference to Pope Joan, though this can't be confirmed with certainty. Medieval commentators casually invoked Pope Joan as a real person. Notably, the Czech reformer Jan Hus, during his trial for heresy at the Council of Constance in 1415, referred to the example of a female pope to challenge church authority. Despite this being a heresy trial, no one on the council pushed back and argued that she was mythical. The fact that even loyal churchmen during a heresy trial didn't publicly object to Huss's mention indicates that the historicity of Pope Joan was accepted. Serious doubts about the Pope Joan narrative only began to surface after hundreds of years of uncritical repetition. As Renaissance humanism encouraged a return to original sources and a more critical look at history, some scholars started to question the entire narrative. The big giveaway that diminished the plausibility of a female pope turned out to be the fact that her story wasn't recorded at all in contemporaneous records. One early skeptic was Vatican librarian Bartolomeo Platina, who compiled Lives of the Popes in 1479. He included Joan in his list of popes, but ultimately concluded the story wasn't credible given the chronological impossibilities, rather than the underlying story itself. In essence, the time period where she was said to have been pope had been clearly accounted for. It was really in the 16th century, however, that Pope Joan became the subject of fierce debate. The timing is no coincidence. This was the era of the Protestant Reformation and the Catholic Counter-Reformation. The legend was dragged into confessional conflicts. Protestant writers often seized upon Pope Joan as a handy example of Catholic corruption or error, delighting in the embarrassment the story caused for Rome. At the same time, Catholic scholars worked to refute the tale and defend the unbroken maleness of the papacy. According to the Counter-Reformation scholars, the chronology was airtight. Leo IV died in July 855, and Benedict III was elected in the same year and confirmed by September. According to this narrative, records like Benedict's charter of October 855 and correspondence from that year all exist, so there's no space where an unrecorded Pope Joan could fit. That said, many Protestant scholars suggested that records of Pope Joan had been destroyed, and the records cited were forgeries to maintain the integrity of the Church. After all, the Church didn't have an official problem with the historical reality of Pope Joan as late as the 15th century. Only when Protestantism became an existential crisis for the Church did Joan become a real issue. All that said, by the 18th century, most historians had come to agree that Pope Joan likely never existed, even putting aside the possibility of forgeries, and there's good reasons for this. Today, historians largely consider Pope Joan a legendary figure rather than a real one, and the story is studied as an example of how medieval legends can emerge and evolve. No contemporaneous medieval document whatsoever corroborates the existence of a female pope in the 800s or at any other time. Not a single chronicle, letter, or record from the supposed era of Joan mentions such an astonishing event, a fact which would be virtually impossible if it had truly occurred. Further, even the fiercest enemies of the papacy in earlier eras never mention a female pope, though it would have been the perfect ammunition to attack Rome. There are no records of Eastern Orthodox sources mentioning Pope Joan after the Great Schism, a fact that historians believe would have been mentioned. Likewise, there are no records to indicate proto-Protestant groups like the Cathars and the Waldensians made any mentions of a female pope. Further yet, despite having clashed with the Islamic world extensively during this period, there are no Muslim sources discussing a woman leading the Catholic Church. In essence, the silence of all sources until the 13th century is the ultimate red flag that Joan was not a real historical person. Even after rigorous historical analysis has debunked Pope Joan, her story has proven remarkably enduring, and there are a few reasons for this. Most importantly, the tale is simply too sensational and intriguing to forget. It's the story of a secret female pope who rises to the position through her sheer brilliance, followed by a shocking revelation and downfall. These are elements of high drama that appeal to human curiosity. In terms of storytelling, it hits the marks of a classic folk tale or legend, which helped it spread by word of mouth and point of pen alike. The story served both symbolic and educational purposes for a wide variety of audiences, all of whom could interpret it in a way that suited them. In the Middle Ages, it could be read as a moral lesson about deception, or even as a comment on the state of the Church. Still, another interpretation that has kept the story alive in modern times is who Pope Joan was supposed to be. According to the most popular telling of the tale, she was much more brilliant than any of her male counterparts, and achieved the position of Pope entirely on her merits. In this way, her story could be reinterpreted as a tale of both empowerment and oppression in a much less enlightened time. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just reminding you to check out my other channels for contemporary unsolved mysteries and true crime content. Also, be sure to take a moment to like, subscribe, and share this video with the history fans in your life. The story of the ghost ship Bechimo begins not with mystery, but with a fairly ordinary merchant vessel. She was built in Sweden and launched in 1914 under the name Angerman Elfven. Measuring about 230 feet in length and powered by a triple expansion steam engine, this sturdy cargo steamer could travel at about 10 knots. Originally commissioned for a German shipping company, she traveled the trade routes of the Baltic Sea between Sweden and Germany. As part of post-war reparations, the ship was transferred to British hands. In 1921, the vessel was acquired by the Hudson's Bay Company, a firm deeply involved in the Arctic fur trade. Renamed SS Bechimo and based out of Ardross, Scotland, the ship embarked on annual voyages to the far north. Over the next decade, Bechimo completed 9 successful trading voyages along the remote northern coast of Canada, visiting Arctic trading posts and carrying valuable cargoes of pelts. In the fall of 1931, Bechimo set out on what would be her final voyage under command of a crew. It was late in the shipping season, and the steamer was laden with a rich cargo of furs collected from trappers. As Bechimo navigated the waters off Alaska's northern coast on October 1st, an early winter storm and falling temperatures conspired against her. She became trapped in the forming pack ice near Point Barrow, Alaska. The crew temporarily abandoned ship, trekking about a half-mile over the ice into the nearby town of Barrow to seek shelter from the brutal cold and wind. After 2 days, the men returned to find that their ship had miraculously broken free from the ice on its own. Relieved, They reboarded Beichimo, but their joy was short-lived. On October 8, 1931, the ship became hopelessly mired in pack ice once again, this time far more firmly, and no amount of waiting or effort would release her. Faced with the prospect of their ship being stuck in the ice all winter, the Hudson's Bay Company arranged an aerial rescue. On October 15th, an aircraft arrived to evacuate most of the crew. 22 men were flown out to safety, leaving behind a hardy elite group of 15, including the captain, who volunteered to remain near the ship. These men constructed a makeshift camp on the sea ice some distance from Beichimo, using timber and materials from the ship to build a wooden shelter. They prepared to winter in the Arctic, hoping to keep watch over the ship and perhaps free her when the ice thawed in spring. For several weeks, the men endured the polar night and relentless cold, all while guarding their trapped vessel. On November 24, 1931, a powerful blizzard swept across the Beaufort Sea and enveloped the area in howling winds and snow. The men hunkered down in their shelter as the storm raged. When the blizzard finally subsided, they emerged to an eerie sight. The Beichimo was gone. The spot in the ice where the 1,300-ton steamer had been embedded was now empty, with only broken ice and snowdrifts remaining. The ship's captain initially assumed that Beichimo must have broken up under the force of the storm and sunk to the bottom of the frozen sea. With that, the remaining crew prepared to trek to civilization. But within days, an Inuit hunter arrived at their camp with astonishing news. He had spotted the Beichimo drifting intact about 45 miles south of their location, still trapped in the ice. Acting on this tip, the captain and his men set out over the ice to find their wayward ship. They managed to track down the Beichimo, which had indeed been carried off by the storm to a new position off Alaska's coast. The crew boarded her one last time, and they found the vessel weather-beaten from its unplanned solo journey, and again locked in ice. Deciding the ship was unlikely to survive the rest of the winter intact, they hastily salvaged the most valuable furs from her hold to save the precious cargo. Having secured what they could, the crew finally abandoned the Beichimo for good in late 1931, and the Hudson's Bay Company soon declared the ship a total loss. Unbeknownst to her former crew, the SS Beichimo refused to sink beneath the ice. Freed from human command, the empty ship began an extraordinary drift through Arctic waters, a true ghost ship wandering the seas without a crew. In the weeks and months following the abandonment, local hunters and travelers started reporting uncanny sightings of a lone steamer on the horizon. Just a few weeks later, Inuit hunters sighted Beichimo still afloat near Skull Cliff, south of Barrow. Several months after that, as winter turned to spring, Beichimo appeared yet again in a new location. By March 1932, she had drifted roughly 300 miles to the east of the point where her crew lost her. A trapper making a long dog sled journey from Herschel Island to Nome encountered the ship locked in ice and actually boarded her before continuing on his journey. In the spring of 1933, another group of Alaskan Inuit hunters sighted the wandering freighter. They traveled out to the Beichimo across the ice and managed to climb aboard. As they explored the ship's cold, empty corridors, fate intervened yet again. A sudden freak storm blew in, trapping the hunters on the ship for 10 days. For over a week, these unintended passengers rode out the gale on the ghost ship, no doubt wondering if they would share the vessel's cursed fate. When the weather finally broke, the group safely escaped back to shore. Beichimo, however, wouldn't remain in one place for long. By summer, she was roaming freely once more. One of the most well-documented encounters occurred in August 1933 near Wainwright, Alaska. The ship was spotted about 12 miles offshore, and this time multiple parties converged on the elusive ship. Local villagers set out in small boats, and a trading schooner named the Trader also approached the derelict. Aboard the Trader was a Scottish writer and botanist named Isabel Wiley Hutchison, who was on an Arctic expedition of her own. Hutchison later described the eerie scene as she and the crew of Trader boarded the HMO's rusting hulk. The ship was firmly stuck in an ice pack, but still upright and intact. The would-be salvagers scavenged what they could. According to reports, the Inuit locals removed practical items such as barrels of preserved food from the drifting steamer. The Trader's crew likewise gathered valuables and attempted to free HMO by attaching lines to tow her. Despite their efforts, the 1,300-ton ship remained frozen in place and would not budge. After rescuers had taken their souvenirs and supplies, another bout of foul weather forced everyone to leave. When they returned the next day, Bechimo had once again vanished from sight, continuing her solitary voyage northward with the shifting ice. Throughout the mid-1930s, sporadic reports of this Arctic ghost ship continued to emerge. In July 1934, a group of explorers encountered and boarded the ship while she drifted along the coast. In September 1935, she was sighted off the northwest coast of Alaska, again evading any attempt at capture. One of the last major attempts to secure the ship came in November 1939, nearly 8 years after her abandonment. Captain Hugh Polson, a seasoned mariner, finally managed to catch up with the ghost ship and went aboard, intending to reclaim the vessel once and for all. He hoped that perhaps the ship could even be freed and sailed again. But as Polson and his small salvage party worked, relentless encroaching ice floes made the situation increasingly dangerous, and the Arctic was not ready to relinquish its prize. In the end, Captain Polson had to give up his salvage effort and retreat, leaving the ship to the ice yet again. This 1939 boarding by Polson is often cited as the last time anyone set foot on the ship. After that, Bechimo seemed to become more elusive as the years passed. Records indicate there were no official sightings during the 1940s or 1950s, though it is certainly possible some unreported glimpses occurred. Many believe that the ship may have finally been fully claimed by the sea. But then, in the 1960s, Bechimo made 2 final surprise appearances. In March 1962, a group of Inuit hunters along the Beaufort Sea coast spotted a familiar silhouette, an old ship drifting along the ice-choked sea. After 30 years, Bechimo was still afloat. The astonished witnesses watched the ghostly freighter, but the encounter was fleeting, and the ship could not be caught. The last recorded sighting of the ghost ship came in 1969, 38 years after her crew had left her to the elements. A group of Inuit hunters reported seeing the Bechimo stuck in an ice pack between Point Barrow and Icy Cape, almost the exact region of her original disappearance. The decades had come full circle with the ship once again imprisoned in Arctic ice. After 1969, the Bechimo was never seen again, and what finally became of the tough old steamer remains a mystery. Over the years, many have speculated about the Bechimo's ultimate fate. Some have suggested that the durable ghost ship could still be out there somewhere, perhaps drifting as an ice-scarred wreck or grounded on a remote shore. Maritime experts generally take a much more dim view of the ship's chances. They agree that the Bechimo probably foundered, perhaps in the 1970s after her final sighting, and now lies somewhere at the bottom of the Beaufort Sea. If the ship was at the bottom of this remote Arctic sea, it's likely that no signs of the ship will ever be found. The Codex Gigas, famously nicknamed the Devil's Bible, is a colossal manuscript created in the early 13th century in Bohemia. It's renowned not only for its size, but also for the breadth of its contents and the mysterious full-page portrait of the devil found inside. It's also famous because the entire massive tome is believed to be the work of one single scribe, a fact that's been mostly confirmed by modern analysis. The Codex Gigas contains an entire Vulgate Latin Bible, but it's much more than a Bible. The remaining pages include many other works that together make it a miniature library of 13th century knowledge. It features two extensive histories by Flavius Josephus, a collection of medieval medical texts known as Ars Medicinae, and the Chronicle of Bohemia by Cosmas of Prague. In addition, the Codex incorporates various shorter texts, including a calendar of saints, various rituals, and even a few incantations intended to ward off evil. Most famously, one page is devoted entirely to a large color illustration of the devil. The documented history of the manuscript is as fascinating as its content. It was created in the Kingdom of Bohemia, in what is now the Czech Republic, sometime between 1200 and 1230. According to an entry on its first page, the earliest known home of the manuscript was the Benedictine monastery of Podlažice in Bohemia. This was a relatively small and poor monastery, which makes it unlikely that such an immense and resource-intensive book was produced entirely within its walls. Nonetheless, the Codex Gigas was treasured there. However, by the late 13th century, the monastery fell on hard times. In 1295, the monks pawned this great tome to another monastery, the Cistercian Abbey in Sedlec. It was soon repurchased for the Benedictine monastery at Barevnov in Prague that same year. Its fame had already grown substantially, and medieval sources described the Codex Gigas as one of the wonders of the world. Over the following centuries, the Codex moved through the hands of those who valued rare books. In 1594, Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II, an avid collector of curiosities and occult items, quote-unquote, borrowed the manuscript. He transferred it to his castle in Prague and evidently never intended to return it, since the Codex remained in this Prague collection until the turmoil of the 30 Years' War, long after his passing. In 1648, as Swedish forces conquered Prague at the war's end, the Codex Gigas was seized as part of the spoils of war and taken to Sweden. From 1649 onward, this Czech treasure resided in Stockholm, becoming part of the Swedish Royal Library, established with the help of loot from this conflict. Sweden would end up as the Codex Gigas' forever home, but its presence there was not uneventful. On May 7, 1697, a great fire broke out in Stockholm's Tre Kronor Castle, which housed the Royal Library. In a dramatic rescue, someone saved the Devil's Bible from the flames by throwing it out of a window to the ground below. The hefty book survived, though according to one report it landed on a bystander and severely injured them. Following this close call, the manuscript was moved to a secure location. On New Year's Day, 1878, it was officially transferred to the National Library of Sweden in Stockholm, where it's been kept ever since. In modern times, the manuscript has occasionally traveled on special exhibit and even made its way to the Czech lands for a short period in the 21st century. In 2007, it was loaned back to Prague for several months, drawing large crowds eager to see the legendary Devil's Bible return to its place of origin after nearly 400 years. No account of the Codex Gigas would be complete without the eerie legend that clings to its origin. According to medieval lore, the manuscript was created by a single monk under extraordinary circumstances, with the help of the devil himself. The story goes that a Benedictine monk named Herman the Recluse broke his monastic vows and was sentenced to a particularly harsh punishment. He was to be walled up alive inside the monastery, perishing of hunger in complete darkness. Desperate to save his life, he promised that in one night he would create a book that would glorify the monastery forever, compiling all human knowledge into one volume. According to the lore, the abbot of the monastery agreed to these terms and said that if he could actually do this, he would be spared. So Hermann, the reclusive Benedictine monk, immediately got to work. As midnight approached and the enormity of the task became clear, the panicked monk allegedly prayed not to God, but to the devil himself. In exchange for his soul, the devil agreed to aid him and finish the manuscript in a single night. With this infernal help, the monk miraculously completed the entire book by dawn, inscribing the full Bible and all the other texts at supernatural speed. To seal the pact, the devil left his likeness in the book, which became the large famous portrait of Satan himself on one of the pages. Thus, the giant tome gained the sinister nickname, the Devil's Bible, since people believed no mere mortal could have created it without diabolic assistance. While this origin myth is both famous and chilling, unsurprisingly, it has no basis in historical fact. It likely arose as an attempt to explain the awe-inspiring achievement that the work represents. The idea that one person could produce such a massive and comprehensive book alone seemed unbelievable to medieval observers, so a supernatural story took hold. In reality, analysis of the handwriting indicates the manuscript was indeed the work of a single scribe, but over a far longer period. Experts estimate it would have taken at least 20 to 30 years for one person to write and decorate all the pages with such care and consistency. In other words, it likely represents the life's work of a devoted monk who labored for decades. We don't know the name of this scribe for certain, but the script strongly suggests it was one individual, and it was signed Hermann the Recluse. Some have speculated that this isn't the name of the scribe, since one of the primary virtues of the Benedictine order is humility. It's been speculated that Hermann may have been someone who the scribe was close to, like a mentor or perhaps a close friend. Notably, the Devil's Bible also presents another mystery beyond its authorship. The manuscript initially contained 320 sheets, but for reasons which are unknown, 12 of these sheets have gone missing. There's been significant speculation about what could have been contained on these sheets, though at least one of them is known to be the start of the book of Genesis. Legends have popped up around what was contained in these pages, with myths unsurprisingly focusing on the potential that something of occult significance was contained within. Beyond the myths, the Codex Gigas stands as a culturally and historically important artifact. It's a snapshot of 13th century knowledge and belief, encapsulating religious scripture alongside history, science, and even rituals, all in one book. The inclusion of so many diverse texts under a single cover is extremely rare, making it a kind of medieval encyclopedia. This suggests it was intended as a one-stop reference for a monastic library, meant to educate readers with a broad range of information, from the sacred to the mundane. Artistically, the Codex is significant for its scale and craftsmanship. Large illuminated Bibles were not unheard of in the period, but the Devil's Bible is exceptional even among these for its dimensions and the ambition of its creation. The full-page devil portrait remains unique in medieval art. While depictions of Satan existed elsewhere, no other known Bible features the devil taking up an entire page, standing alone as a symbol of evil. Werewolf witch trials were a dark and fascinating chapter of early modern history. They refer to witch trials in which the accused were charged not only with witchcraft, but also with transforming into wolves to commit evil deeds. During the late Middle Ages and early modern period, there was widespread belief that werewolves were deliberate agents of the devil, much like witches. This cultural understanding laid the groundwork for trials where people were prosecuted for allegedly shape-shifting into wolves through sorcery. The first large-scale werewolf accusations emerged in the 15th century. In 1428, during the Valais witch trials in what is now Switzerland, officials claimed that witches were causing various misfortunes and transforming to eat the locals. Several hundred men and women were reportedly convicted, meeting gruesome ends due to these accusations. Notably, any property of the condemned, for which there were no heirs, was seized by local lords, hinting that greed might have fueled some of these early accusations. It's been speculated that the most vulnerable people with few familial connections were targeted for werewolf accusations for this reason. From these beginnings, the fear of werewolf witches spread across Europe, peaking in the 17th century and fading by the 18th. Overall, such cases were a small but sensational part of the broader witch hunt phenomenon of that era. In the mindset of the time, werewolves were closely linked to witches. Authorities believed that to turn into a wolf, a person must have made a pact with Satan or used witchcraft, which also required a similar demonic pact. Thus, werewolf trials were essentially treated as witchcraft trials. Judges often used charges of witchcraft and lycanthropy interchangeably, viewing werewolves as simply a specific form of demon-worshipping witch. Manuals on witch hunting and demonology of the period, such as those by witch hunters like Henri Boguet in France, included sections on werewolves alongside other demons. Boguet himself claimed to have seen accused werewolves acting like beasts in the courtroom, and took this as proof of the devil's power over them. In short, to the courts of the 1500s, a werewolf was just a witch in wolf's clothing. This conflation meant that werewolf accusations flourished under the same conditions as witch accusations. People accused of being werewolves typically confessed to wild stories that mirrored popular witch lore. Many spoke of meeting a mysterious man in black, a common euphemism for the devil, who gave them a magic potion or wolf skin that allowed them to change form. They described attending midnight Sabbaths and then going on rampages while in beast mode. Such details were strikingly consistent across different trials, suggesting that the authorities and popular folklore supplied a script that the accused would ultimately be forced to follow. Historians have long questioned why the werewolf witch trials became popular in certain periods and regions. Several socio-political and religious factors are believed to have created a perfect storm. Early modern Europe was rife with upheaval. Bitter religious conflicts, wars, famine, and plague all ravaged communities. Amid such chaos, frightened people sought scapegoats to blame for their misfortunes. Just as witches were blamed for failed crops or illness, werewolves became a convenient explanation for unexplained violence. If a farmer found his livestock missing, or worse, or if someone went missing in the woods, a werewolf became a popular creature to blame. This was compounded by the fact that real wolf attacks weren't uncommon in rural Europe, so it was a small leap to suspect that some wolves weren't wolves at all. Rather, they may have been your neighbors, with secret identities, disguised to hide their true colors. Religious tension further fed these trials. In regions where the church was still striving to stamp out lingering pagan or folk beliefs, accusations of shape-shifting served as a weapon. This was particularly common in the Baltic area, where some parts of the region weren't officially Christianized until the 15th century. These late conversions were generally done by force, making the lingering pre-Christian traditions stay around that much longer. Even in remote alpine regions of France and the Holy Roman Empire, which had long been Christian, local folklore persisted in a way that was often viewed as witchcraft by outsiders. Both Catholic and Protestant authorities in the Reformation era were eager to demonstrate piety and orthodoxy. To this end, they found that prosecuting the servants of Satan, such as werewolves, was a quick way to prove their reputation for faithfulness. Mass hysteria and psychological factors are theorized to have been deeply entwined with the werewolf witch trials. Much like the fear of witches, fear of werewolves could spread rapidly through an anxious community. Rumors of a wolf-like beast lurking in the woods, or a suspicious neighbor acting somewhat unusual, may send a community into a panic. Isolated incidents of violence or unexplained deaths were often interpreted in the most terrifying way possible. This collective fear was reinforced by lurid pamphlets and rumors which suggested that werewolves were essentially constantly on the hunt just beyond the edge of a town or village. Throughout the werewolf panic, numerous trials left their mark on history. One early case unfolded in 1521 in Burgundy, when two shepherds named Pierre Burgot and Michel Verdun were tried by inquisitors. They confessed that years earlier, a mysterious man in black had offered them an ointment to turn into wolves in exchange for their obedience. According to their testimony, they had attended witch gatherings at night and prowled as wolves, attacking innocent people. Both men were convicted and burned at the stake, along with a third accomplice who was accused of aiding and abetting their late-night romps. The case of Peter Stumpf in 1589 is perhaps the most famous of the werewolf trials. Stumpf was a prosperous farmer in Bedburg, in what is now Germany, who was accused of serial slayings over a span of 25 years. Under what I'll euphemistically call enhanced interrogation, Old Man Stumpf eagerly confessed to an extraordinary tale, which was taken at face value at the time. He said he had made a pact with the devil, who gave him a magic belt that allowed him to turn into a large wolf-like creature. In his supposed wolf form, he claimed to have eaten all manner of animals and people around town. The authorities made an example of him in a shocking fashion. Old Man Stumpf was broken on the wheel and then subjected to a variety of other horrors. As one final act of humiliation, his head was displayed on a pike as a warning to other potential werewolves. Meanwhile, in the eastern Baltic region of Livonia, modern Latvia and Estonia, werewolf trials became surprisingly common in the 17th century. There, local folklore held strong beliefs in witches and werewolves, though the peasants saw werewolves as magical beings rather than Satan's servants. One famous Livonian case was that of Thies of Kaltenbrunn in 1692, an 80-year-old man, who I've previously discussed on this channel. Old Man Thies freely admitted to being a werewolf, but claimed he was a good werewolf who traveled to hell to combat the minions of Satan. The judges ultimately let him go with a whipping and banishment, instead of the usual harsh punishment. By the 17th century's end, the werewolf craze had largely run its course. The latter part of the 1600s saw the rise of more rational and skeptical views among Europe's intellectual and ruling classes. Educated elites gradually stopped believing that the devil was literally transforming people into animals. The Enlightenment was also starting to take root, bringing with it a preference for scientific explanations over supernatural ones. What had been seen as evidence of diabolic possession began to be viewed as an illness or false confessions based on overly zealous interrogations. It's difficult to pin down exactly how many people fell victim to werewolf witch trials, because records are incomplete. That said, werewolf trials were much less widespread than the more common witch trials. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just reminding you to click that like button, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. Also, if you enjoy my content and want to support further, please consider checking out my Patreon. You can support for as little as $2 a month. Medieval knights, especially the Teutonic knights, are often imagined wearing winged or horned helmets in battle. It's a powerful image, but how true is it historically? Historical and archaeological records provide no direct support for the idea that the Teutonic knights, or any late medieval knight generally, wore these helmets in battle. Scholars generally agree that the winged helmet is largely a myth, not a feature of actual medieval warfare. Medieval knights sometimes decorated their helmets with crests or insignia, but all direct evidence indicates these were used outside of battle. And you'll notice here that I say direct evidence, but we'll come back to my phrasing on that shortly. Over time, people seeing illustrations of helms with decorative crests, or viewing flamboyant parade armors in museums, may have assumed these were battle items. The gap between battlefield practicality and artistic representation became blurred in the popular imagination, allowing the winged helmet legend to flourish. But with all that said, there's circumstantial evidence to suggest that it's possible that these helmets may have been worn in real combat on rare occasions. It's true that some medieval knights had helm crests shaped like wings, horns, animal figures, or other symbols. Knights in tournaments and festivals often attached light, elaborate crests to their helmets to show off family heraldry or to impress spectators. One famous surviving 14th century Teutonic great helm, belonging to Albert von Prank, sports a beautiful set of gilded horns. It's thought that this piece of equipment specifically was used primarily during jousting matches, in essence, as a way to show the status and wealth of this specific knight and his family. But let's come back to actual combat for a moment. There were good reasons why a knight riding into real combat would not want such appendages on his helmet. Big wings or horns made a helmet heavier, unwieldy, and also made the wearer a target. Ornate helmets may have been perfect for a joust, but most historians agree that in actual combat, very few knights were willing to hinder their performance to look impressive on the field. However, some have speculated that there may have been rare instances of knights who did indeed wear ornate winged helmets into battle, though it wouldn't have been common. The reason for this is personal honor that is bound up with the martial culture of knights. Knights had the desire to be seen performing heroic deeds in combat, and it's been speculated that it wasn't completely unheard of to wear these adornments into battle. Notably, on the other side of the world, in the Japanese context during the Sengoku period, samurai often wore flashy, ornate helmets and armor into battle. The purpose of this was to make it so battlefield exploits were noticeable to everyone, and some believe that European knights may have done the same on occasion. After all, both knights and samurai were heavily tied up in a martial culture bound by honor. That said, it must be kept in mind that this is a speculative theory that isn't currently supported by any evidence. The modern image of Teutonic knights specifically wearing wings and horns was hugely popularized by Sergei Eisenstein's film Alexander Nevsky. This historical drama, set in 1242, depicts the titular Novgorodian prince's victory over the Teutonic Order. It visualizes the Germanic knights as fearsome figures in white cloaks and grotesque horned and winged helmets, in contrast with the good, humble Russian fighters. While this film was, in essence, historical fiction based upon a real event, it essentially canonized a myth in the popular imagination. It took a kernel of medieval heraldic tradition and, through the power of cinema, turned it into an enduring legend. While we can't say for certain that no Teutonic knight or other medieval knight wore wings or horns during actual combat, we can say that if they did, it was very much the exception, not the rule. Instead, these heraldic pieces are largely remnants of the gallantry and pageantry of high medieval tournaments. In the harsh expanse of the Colorado Desert in southeastern California, a set of giant figures lies etched into the earth, visible almost only from the sky. These are the Blythe intaglios, enormous geoglyphs near the town of Blythe, California, not far from the Colorado River on the border with Arizona. Intaglios are a form of rock-based art, generally practiced by pre-modern humans, often for unknown reasons. Modern awareness of these figures dates to 1932, when a pilot flying between Blythe and Las Vegas noticed unusual shapes on the desert surface. His discovery prompted a survey by the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles that same year. While local indigenous peoples likely knew of these sacred sites, non-native people had overlooked them for centuries due to their grand scale and ground-level obscurity. The intaglios are situated on two low desert mesas about 15 miles north of Blythe, just west of US Highway 95. This remote location kept them hidden from outsiders until the age of aviation. The Blythe intaglios consist of 6 large figures arranged in 3 groups across the desert floor. In total, there are 3 human figures, 2 animal figures, and 1 spiral design. They were created by scraping aside the dark surface stones to reveal lighter sand and soil beneath, a method similar to that used for the much more famous Nazca lines in Peru. The removed stones were piled along the edges of the designs, and the exposed ground was compacted. This technique has helped the figures endure by inhibiting plant growth on the lines. The largest of the human figures is an awe-inspiring 170 feet long from head to toe. The smallest human figure is about 100 feet long. Each human is rendered in a simple form, a torso deeply dug into the earth with outstretched arms and legs that are more shallowly etched. The animal shapes are more abstract, with some observers thinking they resemble horses, though others interpret them as mountain lions. Keep this horse theory in mind as we go forward, because American prehistory buffs will know that horses vanished in the Americas long ago. One figure is a coiled spiral about 30 feet across, believed by some to represent a snake. Scattered around the intaglios are also geometric alignments and large circles. One circular clearing, roughly 140 feet in diameter, is believed to have been a dance area, perhaps used for ritual gatherings. These gigantic designs are virtually imperceptible from ground level, and to a person walking among them, they just seem like random patches of bare soil amid gravel. Much like the Nazca lines, it's only from high above that the intentional shapes emerge. The creation of these figures required coordination and effort, suggesting they held great meaning for their makers. Mystery surrounds the questions of who made the Blythe intaglios and why. Mainstream archaeologists haven't reached consensus on their exact age or function. No organic material was directly left in the designs to allow straightforward carbon dating, but some attempts to date them through indirect means have been made. Radiocarbon dating of nearby sediment and artifacts has yielded a broad range of dates from as early as 900 BC up to around 1200 AD. This suggests the intaglios could be as much as 2,000 to 3,000 years old, though their true age remains uncertain. Some scholars believe they were created by the ancestors of today's Mojave and Quechan tribes, who still inhabit the region. That said, they don't appear to have any oral histories related to claiming the Blythe intaglios as their own creations, putting this theory in question, though I'll come back to this shortly. Others have hypothesized much older dates. According to this claim, if the animal figures really depict horses, they might date back to the end of the last ice age when native wild horses roamed this region. However, others take the horse narrative and drastically swing the other way. They instead propose that the formations were made after the reintroduction of the animal to the region. It's believed that by the middle of the 16th century, horses had gradually been reintroduced to the region. Because no known texts or direct oral histories definitively explain the Blythe geoglyphs, researchers have proposed various theories about their purpose. Many believe these giant drawings had ceremonial or religious significance. The presence of the large circle or dance ring and other patterned alignments suggests gatherings or rituals took place on these sites. One line of thought is that the figures were intended as part of ceremonial processions or pilgrimages, for example, stops along a long ritual journey. Others believe that the figures represent events from the cosmology of the people in the region, and may be intended to be viewed by a spiritual personification of the sky, or a sky god. Thus, the reason why the figures don't appear to be anything on the ground is because they simply aren't meant to be viewed by humans, but rather by some form of divinity. Still others have proposed that the figures serve an astrological or astronomical purpose, though the meaning hasn't been meaningfully decoded. What all researchers and theorists can agree on is that these intaglios were not mere doodles or idle artwork. The labor required to produce figures of this scale indicates a deliberate intention, likely rooted in the spiritual or social life of the culture that made them. Although the true originators of the Blythe intaglios cannot be named with certainty, the native peoples of the region do have their own understanding of these giants on the ground. According to Mojave tradition, the human figures represent Mastamo, the creator of all life. In Mojave belief, Mastamo is a central figure who formed the Colorado River and taught the people how to live. The animal figures, in turn, are said to represent mountain lion siblings who assisted Mastamo in the creation of the world. These interpretations align with the idea that the geoglyphs depict characters from the tribe's creation stories, essentially marking the very landscape with the presence of their deities. Yet, interestingly, no tribe today claims human authorship of the Blythe intaglios. There's a sense that these figures have simply always been there, placed long ago by powerful forces or ancient people now forgotten. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just reminding you to like, subscribe, and share this video with the history fans in your life. Also, don't forget to check out my other channels, Lazy Chill Zone and Lazy Chill True Crime, for way more content. In the rugged foothills of southeastern Oklahoma, a massive sandstone slab stands inscribed with mysterious symbols. This 12-foot-high rock, known as the Heavener Runestone, sits in the woods near the small town of Heavener. For over a century, it has intrigued locals and visitors, sparking legends of Viking explorers venturing deep into the American heartland. The runestone's 8 carved letters, weathered but still visible, have made historians and archaeologists puzzle over who carved them and when. According to legend, the stone's existence has been noted since the 1830s, when local Choctaw hunters supposedly found it. By the late 19th century, settlers had also noticed the strange markings and worked under the belief that Native Americans made them. It remained obscure until the 1920s, when experts identified the writing as Norse runes. In 1923, the Smithsonian Institution confirmed the characters were runic, and soon after a local school teacher, Gloria Farley, began a lifelong investigation of the stone. Farley became convinced it was evidence of early European visitors in Oklahoma, and her advocacy helped get the site preserved as Heavener Runestone State Park in 1970. As for what the inscription actually says, the carving consists of 8 runic characters. Early investigators offered a translation of the runes as Gnomedal, generally interpreted to mean Gnome Valley. Later researchers confirmed that this interpretation was incorrect, and that it actually reads Glomdal, meaning Glom's Valley. This reading, widely accepted now, clarified the content of the message but not its age. Farley and other enthusiasts long maintained that the runestone is a genuine relic of Norse exploration, perhaps carved around the 10th to 11th centuries. They theorized that Scandinavian voyagers could have traveled up the Mississippi and Arkansas rivers and left this stone as a boundary marker in an unfamiliar land. Most mainstream scholars doubt that the Heavener runestone is truly ancient. Runic experts who've studied the inscription firsthand believe it was likely created in the 19th century. They point out that no archaeological evidence of a Viking or medieval European presence has ever been found in the region. They also claim that the rune forms on the stone don't match authentic medieval inscriptions. In their view, a late 1800s settler or traveler with knowledge of runes could have carved the inscription as an intentional hoax, or simply as a personal mark. Given this reasoning, historians generally regard the Heavener runestone as an intriguing curiosity rather than proof of pre-Columbian Europeans in Oklahoma. One of the most common ideas is that a Scandinavian immigrant in the late 19th century may have made the inscription. Notably, as with other cases such as the Kensington runestone, it's believed that many of these marks were made in an attempt to root these new Americans to their new home.